The Atlantic Ocean looks calm at night. The water moves slowly, almost gently, as if nothing dangerous could exist beneath its surface. Above the waves, a single American cargo ship moves forward in darkness. Its lights are off. The crew knows better than to be seen. The wind is cold, and the air smells of salt and oil. Most of the sailors are young. Many have never seen war before. They believe the ocean is empty. They are wrong. Deep below the surface, something is watching. A German U-boat glides silently through the black water. Inside it, the air is thick and stale. Men whisper instead of speaking. Every sound matters here. A dropped tool or a careless step could give them away. The commander studies his instruments, calm on the outside, tense within. He has done this before. He knows what comes next. On the American ship, a lookout scans the horizon. There is nothing to see. No enemy ships, no aircraft, just darkness and water stretching forever. The sailors feel uneasy, but they do not understand why. Some joke quietly to ease the tension. Others think of home. No one imagines that death, or survival, will be decided in the next few minutes. Suddenly, the silence breaks. An alarm sounds. A sharp shout cuts through the night. The ship shakes. Confusion spreads across the deck. Orders are yelled, but no one is sure what is happening. The ocean, calm just moments ago, now feels alive and hostile. Sailors run to their stations, hearts beating. They still cannot see the enemy. That is the most frightening part. Below the waves, the U-boat commander waits. He listens. He counts. He trusts his training and his instincts. This is not a battle of noise and fire. It is a battle of patience and timing. One decision, made in silence, will decide the fate of everyone above. This moment is not unique. It is happening again and again across the Atlantic. Ships vanish without warning. Crews disappear into the sea. There are no witnesses, no dramatic headlines at first, just empty waters and unanswered questions. America has entered a war it does not yet understand. The Atlantic is not just an ocean anymore. It has become a hunting ground, a place where fear travels faster than ships, and where the enemy is almost never seen. This is not a war of armies facing each other. It is a war of shadows, a war fought in darkness, distance, and doubt. As the American ship struggles in the night, far away in offices and command rooms, leaders argue and calculate. Some believe this threat can be controlled easily. Others fear it is already too late. But here, on the cold deck, those debates mean nothing. For these sailors, the war is no longer an idea or a headline. It is real. It is immediate. And it has found them. This is the Battle of the Atlantic, a battle without front lines, a battle that lasts for years, a battle where survival depends not on strength alone, but on learning faster than the enemy. And in this opening moment, America is stepping into the darkness, unsure of what waits below the waves. Why this battle mattered. The Battle of the Atlantic was not fought for land, cities, or borders. It was fought for something far more basic: survival. For Britain, the Atlantic was its lifeline. Every piece of food, every tank, every bullet, and every drop of fuel had to cross this ocean. If those ships stopped coming, Britain would slowly starve, weaken, and fall. Germany understood this clearly. They knew they did not need to invade Britain to defeat it. They only needed to cut the lines that kept it alive. For Germany, the Atlantic offered a chance to win the war quietly. No massive armies, no long land battles, just submarines, hidden beneath the waves, striking ships that could not fight back. German leaders believed this was a clean and efficient way to break the Allies. Each ship sunk meant fewer supplies reaching Europe. Each delay weakened Allied strength. To them, the ocean was not a barrier. It was a weapon. When America entered the war, the meaning of the Atlantic changed again. The United States was not just another nation joining the fight. It was an industrial giant. American factories could produce weapons, ships, and supplies faster than anyone else. But all of that power meant nothing if it could not cross the ocean. The Atlantic became the bridge between American strength and European survival. If that bridge collapsed, the war could not be won. At first, many American leaders did not see the full danger. The war felt far away. The Atlantic seemed wide and safe. The United States had a strong navy, and confidence was high. But German U-boats did not need to defeat the American Navy directly. They only needed to slip through gaps, exploit mistakes, and attack weak targets. Merchant ships, not warships, became the real battlefield. For sailors on both sides, this battle felt endless and personal. There were no clear victories to celebrate, no flags raised on captured ground. Success was measured by ships that arrived safely, and losses were counted in silence. Families waited weeks or months for news. Sometimes it never came. The ocean kept its secrets. The stakes grew larger with every passing month. If the Allies lost the Atlantic, there would be no invasion of Europe, no second front, no path to defeat Nazi Germany. The war would drag on, or end very differently. The future of millions depended on ships moving safely through dark, dangerous waters. For Germany, early success brought confidence, even pride. U-boat commanders were seen as elite warriors. Their victories were celebrated. But this confidence carried risk. It encouraged boldness, sometimes recklessness. And as the battle stretched on, it forced Germany to commit more resources to the sea, resources it could not easily replace. The Battle of the Atlantic mattered because it touched everything else in the war. Every major Allied plan depended on it. Every delay at sea slowed progress on land and in the air. This was the battle beneath all other battles, quiet, slow, and unforgiving. In the end, the Atlantic decided who would control the flow of the war itself, not with one great clash, but through thousands of small encounters, missed chances, and hard lessons. It was a test of endurance, learning, and will. And for a long time, no one knew who would pass that test. Before the Atlantic became a battlefield, it was simply distance. A wide stretch of water separating continents, cultures, and wars. For years, the United States watched World War II from across this ocean. Europe was burning, but America believed the flames would not reach its shores. The Atlantic felt like protection, a natural wall that kept danger far away. This belief shaped decisions, delays, and dangerous assumptions. Britain, however, was already fighting for its life at sea. From the first days of the war, German submarines attacked British shipping. Food became scarce. Fuel was carefully rationed. Every convoy that arrived safely felt like a small victory. Every ship lost was a wound that did not easily heal. British leaders warned America again and again. They spoke of silent attacks, of ships disappearing without warning, of an enemy that could not be seen or chased easily. Many in Washington listened. Too many did not act. Germany entered this phase of the war with confidence. Its U-boat fleet was not large, but it was skilled. Submarine crews were well-trained and highly motivated. They believed they were fighting a smarter war, not a louder one. German commanders studied shipping routes, weather patterns, and Allied habits. They saw weaknesses everywhere. Unprotected ships, poor coordination, overconfidence. To them, the Atlantic looked less like a threat and more like an opportunity. American coastal defenses were weak and unprepared. Merchant ships sailed alone, clearly visible at night. Cities along the coast kept their lights on. Lighthouses continued to shine. From the deck of a U-boat, American shores looked bright and careless. German commanders later said it felt like a shooting range. Not because Americans lacked courage, but because they did not yet understand the nature of the war coming toward them. Inside the United States, debate slowed action. Some leaders feared doing too much too soon. Others believed the Navy could adapt quickly if needed. There was faith in technology, faith in size, and faith in distance. Few understood that submarine warfare punished delay more than any other form of combat. Every mistake at sea could not be corrected later. It ended immediately. On the German side, there was also pressure. U-boat crews lived hard lives even before the battle reached its peak. Patrols lasted weeks or months. Space was tight. Food spoiled. Air was limited. Yet morale remained high because early results were strong. Each successful patrol seemed to prove that Germany had found the perfect weapon for this war. As 1941 turned into 1942, the world moved closer to a collision it could no longer avoid. America's entry into the war changed everything on paper. But at sea, reality lagged behind intention. Ships kept sailing. Submarines kept hunting. And the gap between what leaders believed and what sailors faced grew wider every day. The Atlantic before the full battle was a place of warning signs. Ships lost, messages ignored, lessons observed, but not learned. It was a quiet buildup, like pressure beneath the ocean floor before an earthquake. Nothing looked dramatic from the surface, but beneath it all, forces were shifting. By the time America fully realized that the Atlantic was no longer safe, the battle had already begun. The enemy was in position, the routes were known, and the cost of learning would be paid not in meetings or reports, but in ships, sailors, and time that could never be recovered. The Battle of the Atlantic was not only a fight between ships and submarines, it was a battle between ways of thinking, between confidence and caution, between experience and denial. Far from the cold waves, men in command rooms made decisions that shaped life and death for sailors they would never meet. Their beliefs, fears, and blind spots became as powerful as any weapon. On the German side, Admiral Karl Dönitz stood at the center of submarine strategy. He was not a loud man, but he was deeply convinced of his ideas. Dönitz believed submarines were the future of naval warfare. He had studied the failures of the First World War and was determined not to repeat them. To him, U-boats were not support weapons. They were the main force. If used together, in coordinated Wolfpacks, they could overwhelm any defense. Dönitz understood psychology. He knew fear could travel faster than ships. A single successful patrol could force the enemy to reroute convoys, delay shipments, and doubt their own plans. His commanders were taught to be patient hunters, not reckless fighters. They learned to wait, observe, and strike only when success was likely. This approach built confidence, but it also created pressure. Every patrol carried the weight of expectation. U-boat commanders themselves were often young, but highly trained. Many felt pride in their role. They believed they were fighting a cleaner war, striking machines instead of men. Inside their steel hulls, however, fear was always present. One mistake could trap them underwater. One unseen depth charge could end everything. They lived between discipline and dread, trusting their commanders and their machines to keep them alive. On the Allied side, leadership was divided and uncertain, especially in the early years. The British had experience, but they were exhausted. Years of constant loss had worn down both ships and confidence. They understood the threat of U-boats, but lacked enough resources to protect every convoy. Their warnings to America were urgent, sometimes desperate, but not always fully believed. American naval leadership faced its own struggle. The United States Navy was large and proud, built for battleship warfare and decisive surface battles. Many senior officers had spent their careers preparing for a very different kind of war. Submarines felt like a secondary threat. Some believed aircraft and destroyers could respond easily if needed. Others feared changing doctrine too quickly would create chaos. There was also a cultural gap. British officers spoke from experience, often with urgency and frustration. American officers spoke from theory, planning, and confidence in future solutions. Neither side was wrong, but the delay between warning and action proved costly. The ocean did not wait for agreement. Even within Germany, doubts existed. Resources were limited. U-boats took time to build. Each loss was deeply felt. As Allied defenses improved, German commanders began to sense the balance shifting. But pride and early success made retreat difficult. Admitting change meant admitting vulnerability. This battle of minds created a dangerous rhythm. When one side adapted, the other resisted. When warnings appeared, they were sometimes dismissed as temporary problems. The Atlantic punished this hesitation. It rewarded those who learned quickly and punished those who clung to old beliefs. In many ways, the Battle of the Atlantic became a test of leadership under pressure, not just tactical skill, but humility, the ability to accept that the enemy was smarter than expected, that old rules no longer applied, and that survival depended on listening, adapting, and acting before it was too late. As ships continued to sink and submarines continued to patrol, the real question was no longer who had the stronger navy. It was who could change faster. When the battle truly ignited, it did not begin with a single dramatic clash. It began quietly, almost unnoticed, along the American coast. German U-boats arrived one by one, slipping into waters that were poorly defended and brightly lit. To the submarine commanders, it felt unreal. American cities glowed at night. Ships sailed alone. There were few escorts, few patrols. It was as if the war had not yet reached these shores. The first attacks shocked everyone except the men launching them. Merchant ships were struck within sight of land. Some sank so close to the coast that people on shore could see burning wreckage from the beach. Sailors who survived clung to debris while the lights of American towns shone behind them. The contrast was cruel. Safety was visible, but unreachable. Confusion spread quickly. Ship captains sent frantic messages. Ports filled with rumors. Insurance rates rose. Crews became harder to find. Many sailors had signed up believing the Atlantic was safe compared to Europe. Now they understood the truth. There was no safe water anymore. The German Wolfpack system began to show its strength. One U-boat would spot a convoy and report its position. Others would gather silently, like predators circling unseen. Attacks came at night, often on the surface, when submarines were faster and harder to detect. Merchant ships, slow and lightly armed, had little chance. Escorts were too few and spread too thin. On Allied command desks, reports piled up. Loss numbers rose week by week. At first, Leaders hoped this was a temporary surge. They believed experience and numbers would balance things out. But the ocean told a different story. Every delay meant more ships lost. Every lost ship meant more pressure on the entire war effort. For sailors, the battle felt endless and unpredictable. One night could pass quietly, filled only with the sound of waves and engines. The next could erupt into chaos. Alarms, shouting, darkness broken by fire and confusion. Men ran to lifeboats not knowing if they would be seen again. Others went below decks, trapped by damage and rising water. Inside the U-boats, success brought its own tension. Each attack increased the risk of detection. Crews knew that one mistake could bring aircraft or destroyers down on them. After striking, they fled silently, diving deep, listening to the sounds above. The waiting was often worse than the attack itself. As weeks turned into months, the scale of the battle became clear. This was not a series of isolated attacks. It was a campaign, a steady pressure designed to choke the Allies slowly. German commanders believed they were close to victory. Allied leaders feared they were falling behind. The Atlantic became a place of constant motion and constant anxiety. Ships moved faster, but fear moved faster still. Every wake on the water felt like a target. Every shadow beneath the waves felt like an enemy. The war had fully arrived, and there was no turning away from it now. What had begun as scattered strikes was now an open, grinding struggle. Strategy met reality. Confidence met loss. And the true cost of underestimating the Atlantic began to reveal itself. One sinking at a time. The Battle of the Atlantic is remembered not for one great moment, but for its endurance. It reminds us that wars are often decided quietly, far from headlines. That patience, learning, and cooperation matter as much as courage. It was a battle of shadows and silence, of men who fought without being seen. And though the ocean has long since closed over the wrecks, the lessons of the Atlantic still speak about humility, about preparation, and about the human cost hidden beneath calm water. Behind every ship sunk in the Atlantic, there were human lives stretched to their limits. The Battle of the Atlantic was not loud or fast like battles on land. It was slow, cold, and mentally exhausting. For the men who lived it, the greatest enemy was not always the submarine or the depth charge. It was fear, waiting, and the knowledge that help was often far away. For Allied sailors on merchant ships, life at sea became a test of nerves. These were not trained combat soldiers. Many were civilians, farmers, dock workers, students, or men too old or too young for frontline service. They sailed because the war needed them. Each journey carried the same question: would this ship return, or would it simply vanish like so many others? Days at sea passed in uneasy routine. Engines droned endlessly. Watches changed. Meals were eaten quickly, often in silence. At night, fear grew stronger. Darkness belonged to the submarines. Sailors scanned the horizon, knowing they would almost never see the enemy before it was too late. Every strange sound made hearts race. Every sudden stop or sharp turn felt like the beginning of disaster. When an attack came, it came without mercy or warning. There was no time to understand what was happening. Orders were shouted. Men ran through smoke and confusion. Some reached lifeboats. Some did not. Survival depended on chance as much as courage. Cold water stole strength within minutes. Even those rescued carried the memory of that moment forever. For families at home, the suffering was quieter, but just as deep. Weeks passed without letters. News traveled slowly. Sometimes the only message was silence. A ship overdue. A name listed among the missing. There were no graves to visit. The ocean kept its dead. Wives, parents, and children learned to live with unanswered questions. Inside German U-boats, the human cost took a different shape. Life below the waves was harsh and unrelenting. Crews lived packed tightly together, surrounded by machinery, fuel, and torpedoes. Fresh air was rare. Food spoiled quickly. Sleep came in short, broken moments. Every patrol felt like living inside a ticking clock. Fear followed them constantly. Once submerged, a U-boat could not escape quickly. When Allied escorts attacked, crews listened in silence as explosions echoed through the hull. The sound alone was terrifying. Each blast might be the one that crushed the submarine or trapped it forever on the seafloor. Men held their breath, counting seconds, waiting for either silence or death. As the battle turned against Germany, the pressure grew heavier. Losses increased. Crews knew the chances of survival were shrinking, yet patrols continued. Orders were followed. Many sailors felt torn between duty and dread. There was pride, but also exhaustion and quiet despair. The Atlantic did not care about flags or causes. It punished everyone equally. Storms destroyed ships as surely as torpedoes. Cold claimed lives without warning. Men disappeared without witnesses. The scale of loss was difficult to grasp, even during the war. Thousands died without battles, medals, or final words. This was the true cost of the Battle of the Atlantic. Not just numbers on reports, but lives spent in tension, isolation, and fear. It was a battle fought mostly out of sight, but its human weight was carried long after the war ended, by those who survived, and by those who waited in vain. The Battle of the Atlantic did not end with a single moment of triumph or collapse. There was no clear day when the ocean suddenly became safe. Instead, the battle faded slowly, almost quietly, as one side lost its ability to continue and the other gained the strength to endure. It was a victory measured not by celebration, but by relief. For the Allies, survival itself became the definition of success. Ships began to arrive more often than they disappeared. Convoys crossed the ocean with fewer losses. Sailors still felt fear, but it was no longer constant. The night was still dangerous, but it was no longer owned entirely by the enemy. The Atlantic, once a place of helpless waiting, began to feel like a road again. German U-boats continued to fight, but the balance had clearly shifted. Patrols grew shorter, then fewer. Losses became harder to replace. New submarines were built, but crews were inexperienced. Training was rushed. The sense of control that once defined U-boat warfare faded. Each mission felt heavier than the last. The hunters now moved with caution, knowing they were being watched. For Allied commanders, the outcome brought no only understanding. They saw how close they had come to failure. They understood that victory was not the result of one brilliant plan, but of many painful corrections. Every improvement had come after loss. Every lesson had been paid for in lives. The Atlantic had forced humility upon them. For Germany, the battle ended not in surrender, but in exhaustion. The strategy that once promised victory had become a trap. Too much had been invested. Too many lives lost. U-boats were still dangerous, but no longer decisive. The chance to break the Allies had passed, quietly slipping away beneath the waves. Among sailors on both sides, emotions were mixed. Those who survived felt relief, guilt, and disbelief. Some returned home unable to explain what they had endured. Others never spoke of it at all. There were no grand parades for merchant crews, no dramatic headlines for convoys that arrived safely, yet their endurance made everything else possible. The Atlantic did not declare a winner. It simply stopped taking lives at the same terrible pace. That alone felt like a miracle. The war moved on to beaches, skies, and cities, but the foundation had been secured. Supplies flowed. Plans advanced. Hope returned. In this battle, victory was not about defeating an enemy completely. It was about refusing to be broken. It was about keeping ships moving, one crossing at a time, until the enemy no longer had the strength to stop them. And in that quiet, grinding struggle, survival itself became the greatest achievement. When the Battle of the Atlantic finally eased, its effects were felt across the entire world. The ocean routes that had once been filled with fear and uncertainty now became the backbone of Allied power. With supply lines secured, the war entered a new phase. What had been impossible before suddenly became achievable. The Atlantic, once a barrier of death, turned into a highway of preparation. Factories in the United States increased production with confidence. Weapons, vehicles, fuel, and food crossed the ocean in numbers that Germany could no longer stop. Every successful convoy strengthened Allied armies before they ever reached a battlefield. The landings in North Africa, Italy, and later France depended completely on this flow. Without control of the Atlantic, these operations would never have moved beyond planning rooms. Strategically, Germany lost more than submarines. It lost initiative. Resources that could have supported ground forces or air defense were tied up in a naval struggle that no longer offered returns. Shipyards struggled to keep up. Skilled crews were gone. Morale suffered as patrols ended in loss rather than success. The sense that the war could still be won began to fade. Not with a dramatic defeat, but with growing certainty that time was no longer on Germany's side. The Allies, on the other hand, learned how modern war truly worked. Cooperation became routine. Navies, air forces, and intelligence services shared information more openly than ever before. New systems of command and coordination were built out of necessity. These lessons did not stay at sea. They shaped every major Allied operation that followed. The psychological impact was just as important. For years, the Atlantic had been a source of anxiety. Every sailing carried fear. Every delay raised questions. When losses declined, confidence returned. Not arrogance, but belief. Belief that planning, patience, and cooperation could overcome even the most hidden threat. The Battle of the Atlantic also changed naval warfare forever. Submarines remained powerful, but no longer unstoppable. Detection, coordination, and air support proved that no weapon could dominate alone. Future navies would study this battle not for its drama, but for its lessons in adaptation. Many of these changes happened quietly. There were no victory speeches focused on the Atlantic. No single commander could claim credit. The consequences revealed themselves over time, through successful invasions, steady supply, and an enemy slowly pushed back on every front. By securing the Atlantic, the Allies secured time. Time to plan. Time to build. Time to strike where and when they chose. In a war where timing meant everything, this was a decisive advantage. And it all began beneath the waves, in a battle most people never saw. The Battle of the Atlantic rarely appears in a single photograph or a single dramatic moment. There is no famous charge, no captured capital, no clear line where victory is declared. Yet its legacy is deeper than many louder battles. It reminds us that wars are not only decided by bravery and moments of action, but by endurance over long stretches of fear, doubt, and uncertainty. This battle forces us to rethink what heroism looks like. There were no cheering crowds on the decks of merchant ships, no banners flying in victory. Instead, there were men who sailed knowing they might not return, and did so anyway. Their courage was quiet. It showed itself in routine, in discipline, and in the decision to keep moving forward even when hope felt thin. The Atlantic also teaches the danger of overconfidence. Both sides entered this battle believing they understood the sea. Both were proven wrong. Germany believed its submarines could decide the war alone. America believed distance and industry would protect it. The ocean punished these beliefs equally. Only adaptation, humility, and cooperation changed the outcome. For commanders and nations, the battle revealed a hard truth. Modern war is not won by single weapons or single ideas. It is won by systems, by people willing to listen, adjust, and accept painful lessons. The Allies did not win because they were smarter at the start. They won because they learned faster in the middle. The human legacy of the Battle of the Atlantic lives on in memory more than monuments. Thousands of sailors rest beneath the waves, with no marked graves and no final words. Their absence shaped families, communities, and generations. Many survivors carried the sea with them for the rest of their lives, in silence, in dreams, and in habits formed under constant danger. This battle also changed how the world understands power. It showed that control does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like ships arriving on time, like food on tables, like fuel in tanks. The Atlantic proved that logistics, patience, and protection of the unseen can decide the fate of continents. In the end, the Battle of the Atlantic was not about domination. It was about connection, about whether nations could stay linked across vast distance while an enemy tried to tear those links apart. When the Allies held those connections, everything else became possible. That is why this battle matters. Not because it was the most visible, but because it was the most necessary. It was the quiet foundation beneath every later victory. A reminder that history often turns not on one moment, but on years of unseen struggle, fought by people whose names we may never know, on an ocean that remembers them all.